Welcome to the 99 Podcast, a ministry of Crossroads Grace Community Church in Manteca, California. I'm Heather Mahoney, and I'm excited that you're joining us for Season 2 of the 99 Podcast. We hope it challenges you and creates a hunger to dive deeper into Scripture so you can know Jesus better. Pastor Brian Hunt, welcome. Welcome back to the 99 Podcast. What a great week.
It was a good week, and it's only getting better. It's going to be amazing. Another week. We got another one coming up here.
Oh, heck yeah. And baptism weekend, it's never disappointing.
The best.
It is so overwhelming for me every time. I love it so much.
Well, you were saying just before we got on the air, like the soldiers that come home get you, the puppies, and
yes,
then
anyone returning from the military.
Mm-hmm.
I cry. Baptisms.
Yeah.
Leaving our church family in Mexico.
Yeah.
Like Heather's going to cry. Oh, at Hume Lake, there is a night where they have been building up to ask people, would you like to respond to the gospel?
Right.
And then,
that just
yeah. Oh, yeah. And I'm also then reminded that my own daughter, after kind of an internal working through stuff, responded there. And I'm just like, the Lord's still moving.
All the feels.
Yes, so much.
Oh, my gosh.
So much.
Yeah, it's so neat because in the baptisms is, like I always say, when people get in that water, you don't know the stories that are, everybody's full story.
100%.
But like for a split second, they let you in that little world because like you see the relief when they come up out of the water, the hands up in the air, or the families that are getting dunked and the hugs that happen. And sometimes I get caught in the middle of the hug and it's like it's squished, but it's okay. And then just truth be told, like at the end of it, you know how this goes. Like you get done and like on Monday we come in and you see the remnants of the service that's in there, like all the the makeup and the dirt and all that kind of stuff. But it's just I just like that because it's a reminder of just like all this old that's gone and the new that's come, the new life that they're living. So I love it too. It is the Super Bowl of what we get to do. It's so fun.
You know what that just reminded me of? Maybe has it been about a year and a half since Pastor Rick Lackey retired?
Yeah,
Am I wrong?
Pretty close,
I'm off on that. Sorry, Rick.
Yeah.
But I remember, I think you might have asked him, it was kind of, his retirement was coming. We knew him and his wife were going to be moving closer to family.
Yeah.
And you asked him, hey, could you share a few highlights? And he said, my best moment here happened recently. And he had said, I'm available to baptize at all 4 services.
Yeah.
Maybe it was Easter 2023, Easter 2022. And people just kept coming and he was like thunder dunking them and there was water everywhere. And he just said, I will never forget what God did that weekend.
Yeah.
And sometimes I think of that when people are ready and waiting and the worship is going and it's just pretty phenomenal what God is doing. And then we get to watch it firsthand.
Well, and I just love how it all kind of is this, like a glimpse of heaven. Like you have this worship music for Jesus happening around you and people singing and crying and standing and applauding when people come. I'm like, oh my goodness, this is just going to be a little bit of heaven right here. So yeah, so cool. If you are one of those that got baptized, congratulations. Don't forget to sign up for this baptism celebration class. It's going to be coming up really, really soon and some exciting stuff for you to be a part of. So congratulations. Make sure you're taking a next step. Don't just see this as the end of the journey, but really the beginning of the journey. And we want to walk it with you.
Oh, absolutely. God has more in store for you. And we, like Brian said, we'll always put the show notes in the bottom. You just click right on there. It doesn't cost you anything. It's actually a short evening to celebrate what you did. And we feed you and we let you know a little bit of like what God would love for you.
Yeah.
And how he would like to move in your life. And so show up.
Well, and I'll just say one other thing, like, hey, if you're out there and you're like, I missed the baptism thing, let us know. We would love to be able to walk that journey with you. And we've got another one coming up. So that'll be coming up actually at Easter time will be another big one. But if you're like, I can't wait till Easter, we'll figure it out. I've done many a pool baptisms and it'll be cold, but it'll be memorable. So we want to make sure that we want to walk with you. And so if you're out there and you're like, I'm ready to get dunked, we will walk alongside you to do that.
Oh, yeah. And you know what? Hot tub baptisms are real, too.
That's a real thing.
Remember that in the wintertime. Let us know.
We'll have to talk about that. I've got a good story for that in the future. So
okay, next week, I'm going to ask you about a hot tub baptism.
100%.
Okay, perfect.
You will love it.
So last week, you had talked about, was it last week when you said Jesus was God con carne? Like, Jesus with meat.
Indeed.
And then this week, you showed us all your photos of Brian with hair.
Yeah.
And those were fun.
I don't know exactly how those two correlate, but I'm liking where you're
Oh,
headed.
one with the other. Just the play on the words. Not that your hair has anything to do with your holiness, but when you moved to California, you already had embraced. You said, I am a bald-haired guy now, and I shave. And so that was fun to get to see some old photos.
So that would be like Brian con hair, right? Basically.
Sí, con pelo.
Con pelo. Oh, muy bien, muy bien. Sí. Yeah. So I look back at those and I cringe a little bit because then you look at that and you're like, Brian, you thought you had hair. And you like look at it, you're like, you clearly don't have hair. You should have just shaved it like when you were 12. But anyway, but it was fun. And then the other thing that I always think of, and I'm sure Sean would say the same thing, you're looking back in wedding photos and you're saying, what was she thinking? Why would she ever marry like a schlub like me? And so I know I've outpunted my coverage. I love you, Cherie. And so I just am grateful for her. But yeah, it was fun. You know, especially we're talking about a wedding and talking about Jesus at the wedding in John 2. If you missed that, I would highly encourage you to go back. I looked pretty good. I'm just not going to lie. I looked pretty good in that message. The tux felt really nice to wear for a whole sermon.
Oh, nice. Hey, we're about to move on, but before we do, I need to know, what city and state did you get married in?
Oh, yeah. So it's Okoboji, Iowa. And Okoboji,
Okay.
yeah. There's a lake, Okoboji. One of those pictures you probably saw in the background, there was like a lake, and that was where we kind of got married. But so Cherie grew up in this very, very small town, Sioux Rapids, Iowa. I think it was 700 people, 11 churches, no stoplights. So like it was tiny, but and so the closest main place was really Okoboji, Iowa. No, it was really nice. It's a boating community. It's really beautiful and lots of good things. But we got married on a golf course and all that, but Okoboji, Iowa. It was now you could say you've said Okoboji.
Okoboji, yeah.
Okoboji.
My story is really unique. Manteca, California, Crossroads Grace Community Church.
Heard of it? Beautiful this time of year.
Yeah, it is really beautiful.
Yeah.
Hey, let's just dive right into the message. We've covered some what is seemingly very unimportant topics of photos, very important topics of baptisms, but you showed the photos because we really got to talk about some things that happen in John 2, one of those things being a wedding, but we're digging into John's account of Jesus's life. We're looking at the ways that Jesus was less in how he lived so that we can desire to have more of him in our lives. And Jesus was boundless to all those cultural norms. Yeah. All the things happening in John 2, he turned the water into wine, which was the right thing to do, right? Because he saves this couple from embarrassment.
It saves them from this embarrassment, but it was just more than that. Like if you look at the full Jewish wedding ceremony that just takes place, and imagine like this couple thinking, oh, it all got ruined because of wine, and Jesus is like, no, but then the beautiful part about how the Bible is all about weddings and about how the bridegroom of Jesus is going to be coming back. And I don't know, I had so much fun putting that message together and going through that. But it just was so fun to be able to just see how the Bible unfolds and how important each little letter is from Genesis all the way to Revelation. And just to see Jesus even hint where he says to his mom, he says to Mary, like he says, woman, my time is yet to come. And you think, man, what a jerk move. But actually that time is yet to come. That little phrase right there is exactly because the bridegroom, he being the bridegroom, his time hadn't come. It wasn't time for him to come back yet. And so just these little nuggets that if you go through too fast and you don't look at the culture and the context, you miss it. But man, it is so fun when you take the time through it. So in John 2, it was hard part about that. It's such a dense chapter. There's so much in there. So you got the wedding in Cana, but then we get to the second half of it.
Oh yeah, you've got whips that Jesus creates to help work out the clearing of the temple because people are doing things impure at the temple. But again and again, we get to see that God uses the ordinary people to just do these extraordinary things in life. Right. And that is very hopeful for me. Yeah. You know, a lot of us are just out here, we're doing our best, but we're just kind of living normal lives, and we see that God uses everybody. You don't have to be wealthy. You don't have to live in the right place. You don't have to look the right way. It is your relationship with Jesus and trusting in him. It's not what you bring, it's what he's doing.
In fact, he usually does the exact opposite. It's usually over and over when you look in the Bible, he's using a bunch of people you would never, like, wait, you use that guy? You use that girl to, you know, and like, think of the Old Testament, like you have Ruth in in the Old Testament. It seems to be this like very obscure situation in where she's a widow, and then she goes with her mother-in-law, and Boaz comes in. You think, well, that's just it. But that made it to a whole book. Like God wanted everybody to know that story, and probably Ruth's in heaven like, wait, that made it, like that's what you. So, and then you look time and time again. So the extraordinary being done through the ordinary just should encourage us all that God uses every bit of us, every little bit, to enhance his greater kingdom work, and your story matters. I think that's another important thing, that as you think about your life, your story matters, and somebody should hear it.
And that's totally true. And what we often think, because I feel like we've discussed this before when we were talking about testimonies, is that it's easy for you to think your story of how God came into your life, changed you, worked in you. You think it's boring, and sometimes you're missing that God's doing something bigger, and you're just thinking, wow, this isn't as passionate, or this isn't as exciting as somebody else's. I haven't been shipwrecked this many times. I wasn't beheaded. I wasn't stoned. I wasn't all of these things that some of the apostles had been through. But we see God uses ordinary people to do extraordinary things. Yeah. And this weekend, while we focused a lot more on the wedding side of John chapter 2, but actually there's some other important moments in Jesus's life that John refers to. And that one of those, a big one, is the cleansing of the temple, found in John 2, verses 13 to 22.
Yeah, what I think is interesting is that you have this like celebratory moment of Jesus at this wedding, and all of a sudden it's like this hard turn to something completely different. But that's important because Jesus lived in the natural rhythm of life. And so we all go through things where we got these high moments, and the next thing you might get a phone call and it's like, whoa, man, it changes the dynamic of things. True. So with the Bible being so beautifully honest and real, I love that we get to John 2, 13 through 22. In fact, if you would, I'll just read this to everybody so we know where we're at. And it says, when it was almost time for the Jewish Passover, hang on to that, it's a good little nugget we'll get to, Jesus went up to Jerusalem. In the temple courts, he found people selling cattle, sheep, and doves, and others sitting at tables exchanging money. So he made a whip out of cords and drove all from the temple courts, both sheep and cattle. He scattered the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. To those who sold doves, he said, "Get these out of here. Stop turning my Father's house into a market." His disciples remembered that it is written, "Zeal for your house will consume me." The Jews then responded to him, "What sign can you show us to prove your authority to do this?" And Jesus answered them, "Destroy this temple, and I'll raise it again in 3 days." They replied, "It has taken 46 years to build this temple, and you're going to raise it in 3 days?" But the temple he had spoken of was his body after he was raised from the dead. His disciples recalled what he had said. Then they believed the scriptures and the words that Jesus had spoken. So interesting stuff there, because if you remember at the end of John, of the wedding in Cana, it said that because of the miracle that Jesus did with water and the wine, it says that the disciples then began to believe. And then you get to the bottom after he cleanses the temple, and it says they believed the scriptures and the words that Jesus had spoken. And so it was this really cool thing that in both of these situations, it caused the disciples to live and have stronger faith while watching what Jesus was doing and seeing that what he was doing was right and true. And I would just say the same thing for us. As we watch Jesus and look at him, we will see that he's right and true and make us want to follow him even more. So that was a little bonus little nugget before we dive in a little bit more, but that's where we're sitting at,
Sweet. Okay, so it's Passover, you said, to remember that. So am I right to assume that Jerusalem might be pretty crowded? Because Passover is a huge deal there, right?
Yeah, I mean, you could argue that maybe millions of people potentially would have made their way potentially there. And when you go to the temple during Passover, it's this like pilgrimage that you were going to, and it was a big deal. And so when we enter into the scene, and Jesus is like, man, there's a bunch of business going on here. And so we have a hard time with that because we think of, it makes sense. We go to baseball games or football games, and there's vendors that are all around selling things. And so you're thinking, well, I mean, I guess that kind of makes sense that would happen, but this was a big deal because these people might have been maybe once in a lifetime making a pilgrimage to Jerusalem to be able to go to the temple. When you go to the temple, it's required to have a sacrifice. It's key. I mean, that's the whole reason you're there, to be able to sacrifice to the Lord. It's not like here and now where we can go to a church and we can worship and pray. It was in the sacrificial system. So you would bring a sacrifice, you would bring it to be sacrificed at the temple, and it was an expectation that you would bring the very best that you would have. So some people, they might have chosen, because they might have went a long time to be able to get there, they might have said, you know what, I'm not going to bring my own sacrifice. I might get one while I'm there or buy one from a local market before I go to the temple. Well, the people there, they're like, ooh, let's take advantage of this. Let's get some money thing going on here. Let's make a little off this. And so now what Jesus saw was that they were selling the actual sacrifices in the temple, like inside the walls. People were coming in, they were buying their doves, they were buying whatever, their sheep, their goat, whatever it might have been to be able to sacrifice. But no doubt those people were upcharging. They were definitely upcharging, like they were taking advantage of people because they had them where they wanted. And you're trying to think, well, that doesn't make any sense. You know exactly what it's about. You and I, when we go to airports, we know exactly what we get our ticket. We find our seat, we go through security, and once you're on the other side of security, you are in another world, aren't you?
You are.
You are in a totally different world, and they got you. So that's where you can have $7 water, because you're not going to go on the outside, go to the gas station, get the dollar water, and come back through, because you can't even bring it through security. So you go on the other side, and you're inside those walls, and you're at their mercy. Same thing at the temple. You've made your way there. You're already in the temple. How embarrassing would it be for you to have to leave and go get your thing and come back in? No, you don't have time for that. You have to take advantage of the time that you have. And so you're at the mercy of these money changers. You're at the mercy of these people that are there selling you these animals at an exorbitant amount of money. And Jesus comes in and sees this happen. He's like, you can't be selling $7 water to these people. That's not right. Like, you can't do, this is the house of the Lord. This is a pure place. And so that's the utter like disgust that he has in that moment. And that's why this whole business in the Temple Mount was so bad.
Okay, plot twist. One of the temples that I've been able to visit is in Chiang Mai, Thailand, which is a Buddhist temple. It's not a Christian temple. They don't love Jesus at this temple. But it was interesting because before we went, I've gone to Thailand a few times to help lead a camp, Hume, bring it to them for kids over there. But you're going to the temple, and all the way, it's all these stairs. So you buy a ticket to go to the temple.
Right.
All the way up, there's vendors all the way up. Also, they're taking advantage knowing that this is a world-renowned place. People are coming to visit. But you get up there, they are selling like snacks and food at the top.
Right.
And I bought Mentos.
That's what you bought? You got the top?
Yeah, because I try to bring candy back from unique locations. That's like what I get my kids if I go somewhere internationally. And I got it, and then also had to buy toilet paper because in other countries, that's not always something that is provided to you. But I was trying to wrap my mind around, okay, what did the Bible say about this? Now I'm visiting this other one.
Right.
And I'm just like, oh, but they're selling it. And there was lots of things you could buy.
Right.
But there was a whole little, basically an AM/PM or a 7-Eleven at the top of it, trying to figure it out. And it just kind of messes with your mind, because if you don't look into what they're really saying, you're thinking, no, don't sell anything. But really, he's saying, like, don't take advantage. You're making impure something that's meant to be pure. Mm-hmm. It's not just you not buying candy, right?
Yeah,
it was about the purity of it.
Yeah, well, and we have a hard time because there are very few things in our culture now that we would consider holy and set apart. Like everything in some form or fashion is looked at as an opportunity for some capitalistic kind of motive to be able to make a buck off of. And I wish I could say that the church was immune to that, but certainly not. Like, I think that we as a church do a great job of not, like, doing crazy stuff or anything, but there are churches that they'll sell the water that the pastor drank or something, and they'll give you the towel or the hankies or what, crazy stuff that they're like, you need this in order to get saved.
I don't want your dirty towel.
You're not going to get it. So,
thank you.
But there was this. But did you hear about? I think it was in Mexico that there was a church there that was selling plots of land in heaven. Did you hear about this?
I definitely did not hear about this.
Yeah. It was like
talked about it.
$1,000 to be able to get like a whatever acre or something of like, and they said they had sold like probably $500,000 worth of heaven given property for people. And like, that's the example of like where people,
That's not good.
you're like, well, I don't want anything to do with this church. Like,
Yeah,
all
of
they're
course.
doing. And I think that also is probably very similar to what Jesus was experiencing. Like, why would people want to come to the Lord where there's this exorbitant fee that you have to pay, or you have to be rich enough to be able to get the good goat, or whatever it may be? And I think it breaks the heart of God. And that's what happens with Jesus. He looks around and he's saying, you've taken something that's pure and you've made it impure, and that's not going to fly with me, Jesus says. You might be able to do that with your corn stand on the road, and if you want to do that, whatever. But when it comes to the house of the Lord, like, we need to do things the right way, and there's a purity in this temple that needs to happen, and he was bringing that purification that needed to happen.
Oh yeah, and then when I was reading on it, it was saying that there could be as many as 2.25 million Jews sometimes assembled
Right.
in the holy city to keep Passover. So you think of all of those people coming, and rather than thinking how to make people who've traveled on this giant journey to
Right.
celebrate Passover feel welcomed or rested to go to the temple and worship, if I was taking advantage of them, oof,
Totally.
that'd be hard to sleep well at night with that.
But just think about that in our day and age. How different that would be is if we didn't look at how we could make money or how we could be benefited from it, and we just purely served people. It catches people off guard. Like, wait, you don't want anything? No. There's not going to be that little, would you like to add a tip to this charge? No, I just
Turn
want
the iPad around.
Yeah. I just want to serve you. Like, and what a beautiful opportunity for us as Christians, that in a world that is so self-serving, to be selfless makes Jesus shine that much more. And it doesn't take a lot. It just takes a lot of you being purposeful and taking energy out, and to realize that there are some things that are holy, and that includes how we treat one another. So I just would maybe throw that in there.
Oh, it
as a little
absolutely
aside.
does. How we treat each other.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about the purification and taking advantage and not loving people for the sake of loving people. But then we see that Jesus used a whip. So
Yeah.
he doesn't like what's happening. He says, hey, we've got to change this, but why? What's the deal with the whip? Why did he use that to drive out the people who were trying to do business? Why didn't he just say, leave?
Yeah. Well, and if we think about it, last week we talked about him being incarnate. He was both God and man. He could have probably just snapped his fingers and, did a little whoosh, and everybody flies out. As I read through this, I think that there's a lot of things that are there. And some of it is my interpretation, and some of it is, historical interpretation that you can see. One thing that you would notice is that Jesus didn't have a staff with him, not a staff of people, but like a wooden staff.
Oh, yes.
And most people had that as they walked around. They would walk from place to place. And from all my readings, what it really looked at is that culturally that wasn't acceptable to bring a staff within the temple. And I can't find an exact scripture with that. The closest thing I found is when Jesus sent out his disciples and he says, don't take a cloak or a staff or anything with you. But that's the closest thing. But that necessarily mean that they couldn't have brought that in the temple. But historically, it seems as though the Jewish culture was one that you didn't bring a staff. And so that meant that you were, and this is a little dramatic, but you were weaponless. Like if you go into certain places, you can't have this and this and this. But so Jesus came in without a staff. So the fact that there was a whip made, I think that should be interesting too. You'd have to ask yourself, well, okay, where does a dude get stuff for a whip? Like, where would that come from? And so historically, what some have thought is that some of the pieces of leather that he might have used might have come from some of the sacrifices that were already made, that they made to use the hide, and there was these strips of leather that were laying around by some of the vendors potentially, or also maybe some of the cords that were used to lead in the animals for the sacrifice in from the outside in, that you'd have all these little like ropes just laying around, and so he might have fastened that. But still, the question is what would he do with it once he had it? And if you read the scripture closely and you kind of unpack it a little bit, what you see is that there's some nuance to it a little bit. So it says that in the temple courts he found people selling cattle, sheep, doves, and I think that's important spot to hang on to there. And then he says, so he made a whip of cords and drove all of them from the temple courts. Now, if you're going to move large quantities of animals out of somewhere, you can't just kind of like say, hey, would you mind just like, moving? So my guess is that some of the whip would have been used to move some of these larger animals out of the temple in a more easier fashion, since he didn't have a staff, he didn't have a sheepdog or anything like that. And then I don't necessarily know that, because it doesn't say in the text that he just started wailing on people. I think it was an intimidation thing. Like, man, Jesus, he was mad and he was moving, and he came in and used his hands to flip over the tables and to get all the money changers out and all of that. So I think that the whip was used as a focal point of how intense this was to Jesus. And you can also argue that since Jesus was flogged later, that this whip might have been a bit of a nod to what was going to happen to him later, potentially because of the whip. But I do think that what it showed was that he meant business. Like, this wasn't just an angry guy in the temple. This was somebody that was passionate about, to the point that he would make a whip to be able to move people out. He was very angry at what he saw, and I think that was a way of accentuating the anger in that moment.
Okay, so he's accentuating the anger. So does this make this righteous anger? Because if he's Jesus and he's without sin and never sinned, so then when he poured out the money, when he overturned the tables, is this a righteous, holy anger?
Well, I think you bring up a really good point, because some people will say, and you might have run into people too, like, if you get angry, it's sin. Like, you shouldn't get angry. You should just be like, fold your hands and be a good girl, be a good little boy. And the truth is that the fact that Jesus got upset and he was angry shows us that since Jesus is God, that anger is okay. Like, and Jesus was without sin, and so we can look at him and say, okay, anger used the right way, it's possible for it to not be something that's sinful. And you alluded to something, because listen, it's good to be angry at things. It is good. So if you see rape or incest or murder or lying or backstabbing, you could name somebody steals something from you, a divorce that happens, and you should be angry. Those are things that naturally we should be mad at. And if you're not, I think you have to ask yourself, why do I have that disconnect in my emotional brain where I'm not angry at that? That would concern me, that I've somehow like numbed my senses to that. Yeah. And sadly enough, in the world we live in, you could be numb and desensitized to a lot of that.
Very true.
But I think what the important is that it's natural to get mad, but it's the type of anger that's the important to consider. And you mentioned one of them so far, that there are two types of anger. There's righteous anger and there's unrighteous anger, and both of those sit on a razor's edge. Okay. And they'll tip either way very easily. And we both have seen this come to play. Like, so righteous anger is when it's anger that compels you to move, to do something in a positive way. So we'll take an extreme example. So if you have somebody that you love that was molested, instead of going to like hurt that person that did the offense and taking justice into your own hands, which I think in that moment you're like, this seems to be the right thing to do. Righteous anger then redirects that and maybe focuses your anger on, how can I help other people so that never happens to them? How can I take care of kids that have been affected by that in some way? How can I be part of the solution to protect others from that? That's where that anger flips to righteous anger and becomes a beautiful thing. And we see that all the time. I mean, we can see people that have been horribly abused or hurt, or something happens to them, and they take it and they help other people, and the light that shines from the darkness from that is amazing, because everybody else says, you should just been angry, because the other side of it is unrighteous anger. And that's what tips you towards things that push you farther from God. That's where you do you take the life of somebody that did something, or you hurt somebody, or you, vengeance is mine and I'll take it on myself. And the problem with that is that it's a lose-lose. The anger that you were experiencing before, that sin had caused, that's terrible. But now you adding to it, you've actually added two sins to the same situation by you taking vengeance in your own. Like it says in Romans, where God says, leave room for his wrath. And I think we need to remember that. So the razor's edge of righteous and unrighteous anger is real. But we see Jesus using righteous anger by cleansing the temple, getting things the right way, not killing anyone or hurting anyone, but cleansing it so that the right thing is being done. So that's that balance. I don't know. Curious on your thoughts on that. As you think of righteous, unrighteous anger, the scene that's playing out, and maybe what it means to you. I'm curious.
Oh, yeah. It was making me think of a story that I've shared with the middle schoolers a bunch, but picture like 8th grade Heather, long hair, total justice seeker, okay?
Nice. Okay.
And there was an 8th grade boy named Jason at my elementary school making fun of another 8th grade boy named Raymond, who was in the special needs class.
Oh.
And nothing quite quickly enrages me, something like that, when someone goes after a vulnerable person. And I have this vivid memory as an 8th grade girl this is a poor choice I made, chasing Jason around the playground, and I was faster till I just shoved him in the bark. And I have this memory of saying, that's what you get, as if that helped the situation. But when I think about it in my middle school brain, I was like, no, this was unjust. I'll take this right into my own hands. And what I didn't do was help the situation, because one person used words to hurt another. So then I just physically hurt somebody. And maybe he was being nice, not running as fast. I was a girl. Maybe he was quicker. I don't know. But I was instantly like, this is not okay. But there's better ways to deal with that, right?
Well,
but in the moment, if you haven't thought it through, maybe if you're me and you lack some maturity in your life, you can very easily make the wrong choice there. And I took what maybe could have been a cool learning experience and just turned it into a violent experience, which I laugh about the weirdness of it now, but not because it was a good choice that I made.
Well, it comes out of maturity.
Oh yeah.
You know, now that we look back some years later.
At 45, it's not an issue for me running and pushing people into the playground bark.
Got it.
So nobody worry.
Yeah. Watch your back when you come. Yeah.
Oh my God.
But isn't it funny though that the unrighteous anger seems effortless in the moment? Like it just seems like, oh, this is easy. And it's amazing that you probably had that one idea that I can shove him in the bark, but there's probably 15 other ones that were swirling around in your head too. Like there's no lack of opportunities that I believe Satan would put in your head of saying, oh, this is how you can get back. Oh, what about that? But to be able to find the righteous side, it takes a pause. It takes you being able to say, okay, God, this is wrong, and I know you say this is wrong, so how can I be part of a solution of this that actually draws me closer to you and others to you? And that requires a Holy Spirit pause, and a lot of times we don't like to do that. Unrighteous anger is about no pauses, just it's all gas, no brakes.
Yeah, no pause at all. And then no pause to take the time to read the Bible to see what Jesus did, to realize that was the better option that I had in that situation. All I could think was like, how can I make your life horrible? Because you just made his horrible.
Yeah.
And he didn't even ask me to defend him. But I was like, I got this.
Yeah.
Like, just take it down. And it's...
Don't worry. Heather's on the case.
Don't worry. Heather to the rescue. There was no cape there and there was no rescue there. But I like what you said. It's the pause, because when we don't pause, we're not making space for the Holy Spirit to talk to us, to work into us, to convict us. Then it's just us moving forward with my own thought process. And I will tell you what, I wouldn't accomplish much in life if I just did what I wanted every second of the day.
Well, and let's make sure that we're not saying, Jesus isn't saying, and I don't think God is saying that we don't call it for what it is. Like him hurting that young boy or making fun of him, unacceptable through and through. Same thing with all the terrible other things that I just. So it's not about ignoring it. It's about what do we do differently about it that actually is glorifying to God.
I wholeheartedly agree.
Yeah.
Hey, the scene that John depicted in chapter 2, prompted me to think of Psalm 69:9, zeal for your house will consume me, because in Psalms, David was opposed by those who rejected the respect for true worship in the temple. And then it felt like there was this parallel here where you see Jesus here, who's also encountering opposition, also having to cleanse the temple. So as David did that in Psalm 69, Jesus, was opposed for being zealous for God and his worship. So by driving out the merchants, the chief priests, the money changers who had set up shop in the temple courts, was Jesus showing us his sovereignty? Was he reestablishing like a purified, healthy place? Is this kind of the queso con carne that you talked about last week, where we see Jesus was God, with skin on and saying, no, here's what's right, here's what's true?
Yeah, I think it's all of that. And you really summed it up well. I mean, if you look into what David was talking about, and then also what Jesus did, it's about holiness. Like it really always comes back to holiness. Like holiness is being set apart. It's being different. And the temple was designed for that. It was supposed to be set apart. It was supposed to be different. Even the way that it was structured, where there was layers in which that you would come through, and that there was a holiness of the holy of holies that God was at, that only the high priest once a year could be. So that there was this, and what I think is powerful about that is that as Jesus is purifying this temple, very quickly he was going to eradicate the temple at the same time, the need for it, because of his death, burial, and resurrection. That the veil that was between the Holy of Holies and the outside world would be torn from top to bottom, because Jesus now is the atoning sacrifice between us and God. And so there's all these like really, really powerful things. And I would also say that Jesus probably realized that that turning water into wine was good for maybe the cultural feel good, but you need to make sure that there is this vibrancy to the holiness of God that's there. And yes, you can see that through the beauty of a wedding, but you can also see that through the righteous anger of making sure that what God has established. And let's just, the people that were sullying this temple, they had lost sight of how much had went into having this temple being made in the first place. I mean, you go back to David giving the plans to Solomon and building it and all the thing. And David, but Jesus even says, hey, we'll tear down the temple in 3 days, I'll rebuild it. And they're like, wow. And of course they didn't get it, because Jesus was talking about himself and talking about how he's going to take away the temple sacrifice. But yeah, I just think that would probably be important too. And then if we fast forward even more and we see that we understand that we are the temple of God, like we are God's temple, and that the Holy Spirit now indwells in us, I also think that we should probably take some whips to some things in our life, the temple in our life, whether it's some obvious things of like overeating or things like that, but some bigger things of where is there sin in our hearts that have made our temple anything but what God would want to reside in. And maybe we need to take the whip to a few things in that. And if Jesus were given full reign on our temple, what would he be driving out? And that might be an interesting exercise for us to do, but it also might be scary, because he's probably going to drive a lot out of our hearts.
Oh, for sure. Especially because I'm thinking of what John did, then I'm thinking of my own life. So John began the miracle conversion, right? He speaks about how Jesus turned the water into wine, and then he showed Jesus performing a work of cleansing the temple.
Great point.
And this is how Jesus often works with his people. First, he converts them, then he cleanses them. So once we've given our lives to the Lord, there should be this holy discontentment with choices I'm making that are drawing me away from who Jesus is and away from holiness, and making me want to bring the whips to my own life and make changes so I'm more like Jesus versus more like myself.
Yeah, I mean, you hit it on the head. It's so well. I just love what you said. I think you nailed it. That was really good.
Thank you. But can you point out, maybe it's seeming obvious, maybe it's not, but would you be able to point out why that order matters? How you can't have conversion without first having, first you need conversion, then the cleansing.
Well, Jesus would describe it when he's talking to the Pharisees, and the Pharisees were always about cleaning the outside and the inside, and like this back and forth between them. And what he would always say is like, he called them whitewashed tombs, but inside were dead bones. And what we realize is that there's a lot of stuff that needs to get cleaned up inside of us that's really dirty and nasty, but sometimes we'll just clean it up on the outside and we'll never like really dig into those things. But in order for us to really crack that and to say, yeah, I need to work on those things, I need a reason why. And I need to come to this understanding that I'm a broken, sinful person that is dirty on the outside, yes, but also dirty on the inside as well. And so what Jesus is saying is that you need me first so that I can unlock. We need to have conversion first. Like you need to realize that you're a sinner, accept me as your Lord and Savior, and then we can go to town with some Lysol wipes on the inside to work on those things. But if you just clean your version of clean yourself up on the outside and there's no conversion, you're actually rotting yourself out from the inside out. And so we need Christ first, and then giving him permission to come in to start to do the hard work on the inside of us and bring the whips and bring all the things to be able to clear it out. And I think there's a lot of people, maybe you could call them cultural Christians out there, that would say, oh yeah, I'm a Christian. And their rationale for that is, I attend church once a month. I swear a little bit, I pray before my meals at Thanksgiving and Christmas. And I think I cover myself well enough on that. And the truth is that that's not a Christian. A Christian is somebody that says, God, I'm a sinner. and because of the sin, I am ugly and dirty, but I realize that you think I'm beautiful because of Jesus. And if I accept Jesus as my Lord and Savior, you'll actually clean me up from the inside out. So I want to convert from my old life to the new life. And then I'm just going to unlock all the doors and the windows and everything and let you come in to be able to use the whips or whatever to get all that out so that I can be more like you. So you have to have the conversion first before the cleansing can happen, because you need to invite the cleaner in.
Oh, absolutely. I also just encourage anybody who's listening that if God's been doing a work in them and people around them maybe don't notice that yet, like stay fast to the course, persevere, because oftentimes when God's doing work in you, whether it's, physically, emotionally, whatever's going on, if you're working on yourself to be in a healthier place, people can't always tell right away.
Right.
But stay the course, because God has something planned for you. And it's so much better than just painting a house that's about to fall apart.
Yeah.
Changing the structure of it so the bones are good to then slowly you work little by little, and it takes time, and you might have a day of discouragement, but don't live there, because God's up to something, and He's regularly up to something, not
really
just
good.
sometimes.
Really good. Yeah, absolutely. 100% agree.
Hey, so we're wrapping up. Next week, we're on to John 3. What do you have in store for us?
Well, John 3, you get this cool little Nick at Night moment. We get this idea of where we have Nicodemus coming to Jesus. You have some really goodness of when he's describing some light and how light is coming to the world. And so it's going to be really powerful. I would believe that this would be one, if you're considering, like, I've never been to church before, should I invite my one to something? Man, invite your one. I think this is a week to be able to come to. I think they're going to be encouraged by God's word. And this is also probably something to note also, if you're like, man, we're in this series in John, and is it okay to bring somebody maybe midway through the whole series? Absolutely. We really focus in on making sure that if you're there for the very first time, you're not missing out because you didn't have the first 4 chapters. Just come and enjoy. At any point, we want people to be a part of it, and I think it'll be a great opportunity as we dive into John 3. There's your homework. Start to read it. Get after it.
Oh, heck yeah. Well, hey, thanks for another great episode of the podcast. We hope to see you guys on campus. We hope you're bringing your ones, knowing that what God has in store this coming week is just an extra special week to be able to invite them. Brian, it's always a pleasure to have you. I'm looking forward to next week.
Love it.
Can't wait to hear about Light in the Darkness, Nick at Night.
Yeah.
Ayo.
And just remember, God does the extraordinary through the ordinary.
He does. And until next week, tag, you're it. Thank you for joining us today. We hope to see you next weekend at Crossroads on campus or online for one of our 4 weekend services. To view our service times, make sure you check out our website at crossroadsgrace.org. Tag, you're it.